I previously compared the Kali Audio LP8 to my DIY sealed speakers, and it was very clear in that video that the time domain performance wasn't as tight on the Kali Audio speakers. Now, some people commented that the low frequency ringing didn't actually have anything to do with the speakers themselves, but more to do with the room modes, because the Kali Audio speakers were just simply putting out more bass, and that was disproportionately exciting the room modes, and therefore you got more ringing as a result. But the speakers themselves didn't have anything to do with that, and it was all just the room. Bullshit. Room modes do not get disproportionately excited from louder bass. And this is almost exactly the same thing as when people say, oh, if you've got a reverberant room and you're recording drums, just play quieter on the drums, because then you'll have a tighter sound with less reverb, because you're not exciting the room as much. Well, that's just complete nonsense. The time it takes a sound to decay to 50% of its original SPL is the same at all loudnesses. It doesn't matter if it was a loud sound, a quiet sound, it has the same amount of decay given the reverb of the room. Of course, from the point of view of a drummer, if you sit at the drum kit and play quieter, you'll hear less reverb in the room. But this is just like saying, if you want to hear less surface noise on your vinyl record, just play it quieter and you'll hear less surface noise. But the music's also being played quieter, and if you just turn the volume knob back up again, you'll hear the same amount of surface noise. And if you play louder or quieter, the second you turn up the gain on your microphone when you're recording that, you'll hear the same amount of reverb in the room. And this is exactly the same in acoustics. Whether you play your speakers quiet or loud, it doesn't matter. You're going to get the same amount of ringing, the same amount of decay from those resonances in the room, and the same amount of decay from speaker resonances and all this sort of stuff, regardless of whether you play quiet or loud. It's just if you play really quiet, because you're turning everything down, you're going to hear the ringing less because it's below your threshold of hearing. But it's just like the surface noise on the record. It's the same kind of thing. But just because many people in the industry erroneously believe that if you want to record drier drums, you just need to play quieter, or if you don't want to spend as much money on acoustic treatment, you just need to have quieter monitoring, just because people believe that, it doesn't make it correct. And in fact, it's completely wrong. But in fact, that is exactly why I included the EQ version for the sealed DIY speaker in that video, because I was pumping up the bass to a similar loudness as the Kali Audio speakers, and you could still hear that despite the fact that there was more bass, it was still tighter on the DIY speaker and looser on the Kali Audio speaker. So that led many people in the comments to ask, what will happen if you just simply block up the ports? Will it sound tighter? Will it sound better? Well, that's exactly what we're going to discuss in this video today, and I've got more A/B examples for you. So let's just remind ourselves first the problem, what it sounded like before, using our test track of Feral by Radiohead, and we're going to do just a really short loop so that it's identical and it loops the whole time so you can hear exactly what is happening to that kick drum pattern. We're now going to stuff the port to see if it changes the sound either in terms of frequency or time domain response, and we're going to use different materials for this test. The first material that we're going to use is male underwear, and so I'm just going to stuff the port and see what difference that makes. The next material I'd like to test would be female underwear, because there might be a difference between male and female in this regard. So let's take out the male underwear and replace it with female underwear. I think I'm now happy with how this port has been stuffed. It's quite a tight fit, and it required 3 pairs of knickers as opposed to the 1 pair of boxer shorts in the male underwear. For the final material, I'm going to be using acoustic foam. I'm going to cut it out to size with a pair of scissors and put it in there as best as I can so it's completely filled. So this chart here is showing us what happens when we stuff it with the different materials, and that is relative to unstuffed. So whether you're using the boxer shorts, the knickers, or the foam, it's all doing pretty much the same thing, and what is that is rolling off the low frequencies. Now, although I wouldn't take the small little ripple seriously, that's just measurement noise, I am taking seriously the bump at 750 to 850 hertz. It's quite possible that the effect of stuffing the port does actually increase the mids there. And also, I'm not really sure if I should take it seriously that it's increasing again below 40 Hz, but the larger wiggle that's happening at 45 Hz could have something to do with the port tuning frequency. I'm not exactly sure. But regardless, the take home here is that stuffing something in the port makes the low frequencies roll off. But this chart here is the one that we really want to see in terms of the time domain performance. Does it just roll off the low frequencies with no other effect, or does it have a positive impact on the time domain performance? Well, this chart says it does have a positive effect on the time domain performance, but there's a lot of noise in the signal. That's because this data is essentially a second order derivative of the original sine sweep that I did in Rumi Q Wizard. So after doing a sine sweep, Rumi Q Wizard does some magical stuff to calculate the decay, and the lower the frequency and the longer the time frame, the more unreliable and noisy the data is. So this data is derived from sketchy data, which is derived from the sine sweep. So you can't really trust it 100%. We need to take it with a bit of a pinch of salt. However, there is a general trend. And if we put a trend line on there, we can see what the general trend is. And the general trend is the decay times are getting slightly shorter the lower the frequency goes below around the same kind of roll-off frequency that we were seeing when we stuffed the port and looked at the frequency domain. What does that indicate? It indicates that when you use a bass reflex port, it causes resonances which hypes up the bass and makes the low end loose. But when you stuff that port with underwear, well, now you're not getting the bass hyped up anymore, and the time domain sloppiness, which was a byproduct of hyping up the bass, also returns back to normal slightly. However, I was expecting the chart to be a bit more dramatic, and what I'm hearing does sound a bit more dramatic, but that said as well, it doesn't sound as dramatic as I was thinking it would sound by stuffing these particular ports. That leads me to suspect that the port isn't the only suspect in this speaker having a fairly loose time domain performance. Maybe there's internal cabinet resonances or something else going on, but I'm not going to waste my time taking apart this speaker and making this a multi-part series. I don't think anyone cares that much. I just think that generally speaking, we've just shown here that plugging the port does improve the time domain performance, and at least in my test, it doesn't really matter what material you plug the ports with. Whether that improvement is very subtle or more noticeable, I can't really say with this data because the data isn't really reliable enough. I'd need an anechoic chamber or a higher quality setup here than what I've got available to me. But we do see an improvement, a tightening in the time domain performance. Okay, so let's listen to the audio ABs now. Let me know in the comments down below if you can hear a difference between the different materials. I don't think you should be able to because the charts say that they're almost identical.